1951 Studebaker champion.
Who was Slim's sister, who did a ton of genealogy work on several sides of the family, including the Mercers. So there is some information that I got from her and then added to some of it. I want to thank Mary Treaster for keeping EC Dreams alive by convincing me it was a good idea to move out here. Many years ago, it seems like now. One thing I failed to mention, I think we're mostly family here, but this family has a ton of talent, and you'll see that in the next hour, and maybe even longer. I want to thank my brother Steve and my sister Cindy for selling Mary and I the house and 7 acres so that we could call it our home and do all the renovations and additions that we've done to the house. So very much indebted to them. Unfortunately, Steve died 20 years ago, and he can't be here today, obviously. And that's a really sad thing. But I was talking to Tony, it might be a good thing too, because we'd be here for hours listening to Steve. He was the historian in our family, certainly on the Civil War, which Edwin C. was a veteran of. And so that we can be thankful for. You ready? With the song? We have a song we're going to play here in just a second. As soon as Mary tells me we're ready. If it doesn't work, we can do without it. Thank goodness we don't have all 80 to 100 people here yet, which we're expecting. So, as some people famously sang one time, that'd be Cool in the Gang. We're going to celebrate and have a good time tonight. Can we hear it?
Yeah.
And we can be a bit hokey. Celebration! And the talent goes deep. All right, that's enough. All right. Testing. Okay, I am the MC, by the way, if you hadn't already figured that out, and probably the one who's going to be talking the most. But we're going to start with Tony, Steve's wife, and she is going to acknowledge the people that lived here before the Mercers. So, Tony, amazing person, Tony. We love her. Here. We're bringing a program line.
All right, come here, watch the show.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to turn the
turn the coin and extend a very enormous thank you to Mark and Mary for inviting us here today for this event and for attending to this farm for many, many years. So on behalf of the Steve Priester family, we are enormously indebted to both of you. Thank you very much. So today I have been asked to do the land acknowledgement, and a land acknowledgement is a tradition that dates back many centuries among Native peoples. This is customary to acknowledge the people who are recognizing indigenous peoples who lived before, and it's now become part of ceremony and opening in quite a number of non-Native people gatherings and institutions and organizations. So this is a way that we acknowledge the peoples who lived and worked here before us. So our statement today, I'm going to share that with you. With true respect, we gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather. With greater understanding, we acknowledge the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their homes across the Great Plains today. So, over the centuries, we don't know exactly who passed over this particular land, but we can guess the Kansa, the Kiowa, the Pawnee, Wichita, Osage, maybe even Sac and Fox, perhaps even Comanche. We know that our family had interactions with the Kiowa, and I want to let you know that the Osage people are gathering 2 weeks from today for a 150th celebration of the opening of the Osage Reservation, just as we are celebrating the farm, 150 years. It's 150 years for the Osage Reservation, 1872. So now, in honor of that, I want to share with you a few Kiowa phrases and some Plains Indian sign language that I hope you will join me in as we open up the ceremony tonight. So there is a Kiowa phrase that says this is a very special day, and that is on day ki. So you would just lift up your arms and say on day ki. And we're going to now learn an important word for the speechifying this afternoon. There's a Kiowa word that's ka, or ha, H-A-W, and it's kind of like an affirmation, like saying amen. And so if you are listening to speeches and you feel moved to affirm that person, you say ha, ha, yes. And it's really better if you give it a little punch. So if you would join me in saying that 3 times.
Ha, ha, ha.
Yes, that's perfect, and you can use that at any time. And now I'm going to ask you to stand if you are able to. There is a phrase that means, it's a Kiowa phrase for how wonderful to see all of you. And it is Day-o day, aim-bone.
Day-o day, aim-bone.
So open up your arms and turn to your neighbors and say, Day-o day, aim-bone. And now, the symbol for love. Your hands are fists, and you cross them in front of you and hold them close to your heart. And then out, just a bit. That's love. And now, we want to show the land by sweeping our arms like that, and fists on top like this. Good. So now if we put this together, we will all say together how much we love this land. So, ha, 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 ha. Thank you.
Testing. For those of you who came after I introduced Tony, she is my Steve's my older brother's wife. And I didn't want to say this before she came up because I didn't want to put her on the spot, but she's a professional at that sort of thing. But you did that professionally once, I think, for Nelson Adkins, did you? No, I'm wrong. Not the first time I've ever been wrong. Okay, so tonight we have some presentations from other members of the family. We're going in chronological order other than Tony. So next up is me as the oldest family member. Now I'm going to spin out a lot of dates and a lot of names, and you're not going to be able to keep all this straight. But there's a written document here. There's the banner. I love that banner. There's a timeline of the Mercer Treester and a family tree over there. So if you want to later on go up and look at some of that, feel free. The story, at least my story, begins in 1862. Edwin Clem Mercer, we'll call him EC, joined the Union Army in the middle of the Civil War and joined the Illinois Cavalry. He fought in quite a few battles, went with in Sherman's March to the Sea, and stayed in the Union Army until the war was over. When the war was over, his company was shipped to Fort Larned, and he was a scout, an Indian, a scout for the wagon trains, one of three that would accompany the wagon trains between Fort Larned and Fort Scott. And several times in the 6 months he did that, he camped along the creek that runs dry today, but during his time, it was flowing, and he said, someday when I get out of the Army, I'd like to come here and homestead this land. Once he was discharged in December of 1865, he went back home to Illinois. He got married. They had 3 kids. In 1871, they start to make their dream come true. They get load their possessions up in a covered wagon and start heading for Kansas. In February of 1872, they get to this property. They build a dugout about 350, 400 yards that direction. They stay in that for a couple of years. 12 by 16, no windows, buffalo hide for a door. There are some other stories. This was written by my Aunt Viola Mercer, and in the documents there. I'm not going through all of them because it would take way too long. I know I'm too boring to go through all of that, but it'll distract me. They started farming in 1874. Grasshopper plague came and ate everything. So Hetty Mercer, his wife, goes back to Illinois. They have another kid. She comes back the next spring then with 4 kids. By that time, he's built a 2-room dugout where this house sits now. Has windows, has a wooden door. It also becomes a timber claim. Notice we have a few trees around. He went up to the Nenaskaw River and got some saplings and came and planted them. And some of these 150-year cottonwood trees still stand. Some of them don't. And I've done a lot of work around here burning those off. But we still love our trees. In 1877, Martin Sherman Mercer was born. First of their 8 children that were born that they had. He was the first born in Kansas. That was my great-grandfather. And he was raised on this place, obviously. In 1900, he marries Sarah Miller. Great-grandma Sadie. I knew her. And they built a house, another house, down by the stream, the creek. And that's where they raised their 3 children. My grandfather, Lois Willard, or we'll call him LW or Slim from here on out. He would appreciate that. Was born there. His brother in 1900. His brother Harold was born there, and Viola was born there in 1905. They lived there until 1919, when Martin, we'll call him Mart, because that's what they were called. He was called. They moved into Pretty Prairie. He bought the telephone company, which would have been great if they'd been able to continue owning it, because those things became very valuable. But unfortunately, 6 months after he bought it, he was electrocuted on Main Street in Pretty Prairie. So they sold the telephone company, bought 80 acres of land and a house, Sadie did, over about 6 miles southeast by Lone Star Cemetery. In 1900, or approximate time, Mart had taken over the farming, and E.C. Mercer took over watching the orchards that were on the place of peaches, apples, cherries, and berries, according to Aunt Viola. And I didn't know that before reading this document I found. And he was a blacksmith. And there was a garage over right around here when we moved out here. That's where he did his blacksmithing. And you can see some of the tools that he used in his blacksmith that we still have over there. In 1900, after Mark took over the farming, of course, then he couldn't do it after 1919, and Slim, my grandfather, took over the farming. In 1928, E.C., the original homesteader, dies. In 1930, Slim marries Martha Ann Holmes. Martha Ann Holmes, Dolly, as she was called, was my grandmother. And my mother was born a year later, Carol Jean Mercer. And they and Sadie lived in the house over on the other 80. In 1933, then Hetty dies. So nobody lived on the property at that point. The land was inherited by the children, so the children owned 1/7 of the property. Since my granddad and Aunt Viola and Harold's father had died, they got 1/3 of 1/7. And so my granddad got 1/21, so not a very big share, and he was the one doing the work on the land. So some of this is oral history that he told me that many times as we drove out to western Kansas farming out there. And he wanted to buy the land, but he also had an uncle that lived in Oklahoma that wanted to buy the land. And this was like in 1934, 1935, middle of the Great Depression. People didn't have much money, particularly my grandparents. But he went into Pretty Prairie. The Collingwoods owned the bank in Pretty Prairie. He asked them for a loan. I don't know they really expected to get it, but they did. They loaned him the land, the money to buy his aunts, uncles, and siblings out. So he, living over there, he came back to the land here, having bought it, tore this the old house down, which is this right here is the old house. The house was built over the dugout. It was 6 rooms. And he tore that house down. He tore the other house down that he was raised in. And he and some other people, of course, built this home. So in 1937, Slim, Dolly, my mother Carol, 6 years old at that time, and Slim's mother, Sadie, move into the house. At this point, I'm stopping the story. I will get back to it later and go from there, but and let other people talk. But I just, there's a far cry of what they moved into from a 2-room, or really a 1-room dugout out there and a 2-room dugout here. So anyway, now chronological order. That means my sister,
Right here.
Cindy, gets to talk and other memories. Thank you, Cindy.
So as we celebrate the 150th year of our farm and this land, I want to share some memories of my
Hold it closer.
of my grandparents and stories, especially my grandparents, but also parents, and talk about some stories that connect us to the farm. Through these relationships, we learn the values of hard work, patience, perseverance, education, the importance of education, making do with what we have, and love and commitment to family. My grandfather would be so happy to see this gathering today. And I know he's looking down and appreciates all that Mark and Mary have done to nurture this farm in the last decades. I have a memory of being a young adult and being at my grandparents' house, Dolly and Slim's house, at Memorial Day. And my grandfather and I were putting flowers, little boxes with flowers in it, to take to a myriad of graves and cemeteries, at least 3 cemeteries, maybe 4. And my grandfather turned to me and he said, "When I'm not here anymore, I want you to continue to decorate the graves because I want you to remember me and remember the people that came before you." So I've always thought of that each Memorial Day and appreciate. So I know that he'd be pretty excited about this event because that's what we're doing is really thinking about them and all they did. So you've heard that my grandfather, Slim, experienced multiple losses in his life. And after the death of his father, he had to commit to supporting his mother and younger siblings through farming. He didn't have much time to focus on starting his own family. So Grandma Dolly told me at one point that after about 8 or 9 years of dating my grandfather Slim, she grew tired of waiting for him to pop a question. So she'd been teaching down the road from here in Castleton. So she and a good friend of hers went to Fort Hays and went on a double date. And the Monday, that was a weekend, and the Monday after that, my grandfather was waiting in his pickup outside of the one-room schoolhouse at Castleton. And she walked up to him and he said, "Well, I guess we better get married." And they did. My grandmother wasn't interested in being what do they call it? Old maid. Old maid. That was the term that got used, right? My grandmother could be very patient and persistent, there's a story of a cow that was purchased with her salary, and which she sold to the neighbor to fund a piano. And my grandfather didn't know anything about this piano, so when it was delivered to the house, he made Grandma send back the piano, and he bought the cow back from the neighbor. So there's more to that story. It has to do with a trip to Hawaii, a piano, new carpet, and I think that was it. Garage door. And I was the beneficiary of 2 of those things, but it's a longer story, and I only have 5 minutes. So if you want to hear it later, I'll tell you. So my brothers and I spent many summer days on the farm driving the Case tractors that you're going to hear about from Nick. The exhaust was so hot, there was no cabin, and we were just filthy by the end of the day after we drove those Case tractors. And when I was younger, I would watch my father and my grandfather work on those Case tractors, and the farm hall too, I guess. And they would send me to go get tools. Sometimes I didn't know the name of the right tools. At any rate, my grandparents never cussed, but I began hearing from time to time my grandfather say, "Chick." So it took a long time. Probably one of my brothers clued me in to what he was actually saying at that time. But it was a very amusing thing. We found it very funny. So the summer of, probably the most memorable time I have of my grandfather was the summer before he retired from farming. And he had been farming out in Leota, the land that his mother, Sadie, had purchased and he had inherited. So he asked me to go out and help him work the land, and that was going to be the end, right? So I said, sure. We went out there, and there was one tractor. We ran it for 12 hours for a couple of days, and I was totally sweaty, exhausted, and this 79-year-old man just kicked butt. I was kind of embarrassed because I couldn't keep up with him. So, and what we didn't know at that time was that my grandfather was told that he only had, didn't have long to live because the walls of his arteries were so paper thin they were going to burst. So, that summer, no, not that summer, that winter, the day he died. Nope, jumping ahead, sorry. So the other thing he wanted that summer was for me to drive he and Grandma out to Colorado so that they could visit all of their family members and, see some of beautiful Colorado. And I said, sure, I'll do that. I had no clue that he was going to, I drove, right? And that I was going to have to drive from Durango to Ouray on this road that's just like incredibly frightening. And I was so scared that I was going to run off the edge and kill my grandparents with the car falling into the canyon. So even to this day, I think of that, how frightening was that was. At any rate, my grandfather, on the day that he died in December of that year, was very quiet that day, but he turned to me at one point and he said, that was such a beautiful trip that we had out to Colorado. And I really appreciate that we had that together. So you can see my relationship and experiences with the farm and the people have continued to ground and shape me. And I hope that we have also passed these values on to our children and that our children will pass them on to their children.
Her time, which I'll use in a little bit later. But I was mentioning talents, and I want to point out Mary, just a few of Mary's talents. You just look around the place, flower, garden. I didn't do that. That's Mary's work. Just incredible. So next then would be Matthew. Well, both of us in that one. There's Matthew. And Matthew's going to share some memories of growing up on the farm.
At least said when he told me.
Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. I didn't really prepare anything exactly. I've just been thinking about it. And honestly, growing up on the farm, it was so impactful to me growing up. I've thought about it a lot. I've even tried, writing it down a few times, but sometimes it's kind of hard to find the words exactly to what it meant and what it felt like. So when I was asked to talk about this, I didn't really think I was going to be able to write it all down in the perfect words, so I'm just kind of going to wing it. But growing up when I was a little kid, at bedtime, Dad would tell me stories about all these ancestors here, and I'd go to sleep, and it was on the west side of the house, and I would think about all these ancestors living here, growing up here, doing the work here, and I'd even dream about it. And so, I mean, it's really deep down inside. And growing up, I grew up, Mom had basically a daycare watching other kids. So before I went to school, I was here every day exploring, and I'm sure that I've explored every acre on this land. And going around, I think about, not just the ancestors, but also the Native Americans that passed through here. And, like Tony said, we're not really sure, who came through here. But honestly, thinking about it, I mean, we probably were the first people that spent our whole lives on this 160 acres, because most times those people would be passing through, and unlikely that they'd be settled here for their whole lives. Another really big, impactful memory was Grandpa farming and riding a tractor with him and coming in for lunch and just destroying the sink because his hands were so dirty from tractor grease.
So Daryl Treaster.
Grandpa Daryl Treaster, yeah, sorry. So yeah, he farmed this land. I think it said he started in 65 and went until after I went to college. So that was a really long time working the land. But yeah, riding a tractor with him was a really, really fond memory. I'm probably, going to skip some, but I'll keep it short. But another thing I did was a history project in school where I did a lot of research on E.C. Mercer and his time in the Civil War and fighting in Missouri. And I think I remember that his brother died in a prison camp in Texas or something like that. Yeah. So.
Yep.
I mean, that was definitely lived a really hard life. Going through that, I can't imagine something like that. I guess another thought that I had, I went to the school in Colorado, and I've just, met a lot of people, that grew up in the suburbs or the city or something like that. And that just always, and I live in town now, but that always seemed different to me because it was just, my experience was growing up on a piece of land like this. We could run around like this guy's running around now. Just run all around the land and explore, and that's what I did a lot of times when I came back too. So overall, and it's not just this land exactly, but it really gave me a strong connection to land and nature, and also taking care of land. Actually, at one point, quit my job and joined the Forest Service just because I was getting into land stewardship and that type of thing. And also thinking about, this land, even, living in Montana, which is really far from here, still thinking about this land. So, yep. That's, I'm sure that's 5 minutes, so that's some memories. Thank you, everybody.
Aha.
Yeah, Matthew lives in Helena, Montana, so Mary and I get the pleasure of going up there quite often. Next would be Andrew, another of our sons, the only other one, and he's going to talk more about what he's doing now and his photography. He is an attorney by trade, several talents here.
Yeah, so I grew up on the farm. I was born the day after my parents moved to the farm. and spent my whole schooling at Pretty Prairie, and ended up in Colorado with my wife. We were somewhere with right there with our 2-year-old daughter, and we're in Denver, and we spent a lot of time in the mountains. So growing up, Matthew and I did 4-H, and I got into photography a little bit, enjoyed it. About, I would say 15 years ago, I got an actually decent camera and started messing around with it and trying to take photographs of the farm. And about 3 years ago, I got really serious about it and started creating an actual side hustle, so that maybe I don't have to spend my whole life being an attorney. And so, as one of my contributions to this, I printed off a number of photographs that I've taken of the farm through the years, and they're hanging in the house. Some of them are of Kansas, some of them are the farm, some of them are actually of Colorado. But I hope you all enjoy them, and that's what I got. So here you go.
Haha.
Thank you, Matthew. Andrew? Yeah, I know which one. Okay, next in chronological order is Alex Priester, who is Tony and Steve's son. So, Andrew lives in Denver. Alex lives in Kansas City.
All right, so yeah, as Mark mentioned, so we live in Kansas City. My wife Lindsay, and this is our son Brooks here. And my 2 brothers are here, Nick and Grant. And when Matthew was talking about growing up on the farm and having that experience, we had a different experience because we grew up in the city. And that was kind of our day-to-day life that we knew, but there was something really special about being able to come here and still feel like we had a place to go, to get out of the city, to experience something that was really meaningful and profound for our family, which is this piece of land. So I put together a slideshow that's I'll start scrolling it once we're through the presentations, but it has photos from 7 generations of the family that have been here. So pretty incredible. And one of the photos that's here on the banner shows Edwin C. sitting here in this same spot. And I think there's something really sacred and powerful about the fact that they're sitting here gathered in this space, and 150 years later, we're here in the same spot, looking up at a lot of the same trees that are still here. So you'll see in the photo slideshow a number of different things, but a couple of things that I think are interesting are with the slideshow. I started with telling the story of Edwin C. And I used some of the records that my dad had kept on his service in the Civil War. And you'll see on the slide that's up here, it shows some of the places that he served during the war, and gives you a little bit of a timeline between 1860, it was the later part of the war, I think 1864, and then 1865. At the end of 1865 was when he left the military. So that's interesting. Several years ago, when I was doing a lot of family genealogy work, I had a couple of Edwin C. photos up on one of the ancestry websites, and I think it's somebody who is a distant relative contacted me, and it turned out that he had a couple of photos, and one was the photo that you see here on the screen of Edwin C. So him and 2 of his brothers. He was one of 5 brothers, and they were all Union soldiers. And so it's just an incredible photo of 3 of them, and getting to see Edwin C. what he looked like in the Civil War era was pretty incredible, because this is always the picture that I think most of us had in mind of him in much later years. So that was an interesting discovery, and this same guy also shared a couple pictures of Edwin C.'s brother, who was a sharpshooter, and so that was just interesting to see his regiment and where they served as well. Some other things that you'll see in the slideshow are just memories through the years of all the different gatherings and the family Christmases and all the incredible times that we've had here together. One of the special things about the farm here is in the living room, the fireplace has a scene that shows the covered wagons, and it's pretty neat to see in the slideshow all the different images from decades and decades and decades of family members gathered around that same spot, and to see all the different generations, the new babies that are shown in photos, the pictures that show multiple generations. There's a number of photos that show 3 or 4 generations pictured at one time. So definitely hope you'll get a chance to take a look at those. But that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Alex just, he got these skills working at a church, but he just started as a professor at Kansas University. So congratulations, Alex. That's fantastic. Next is, I forgot to say my sister has real good musical talents, and I should have said that then. But I'm going to say here's our best musician of the family, Will Priester from Lawrence, Kansas.
I guess.
Oh, you're getting.
I guess that I will say just a little something. You heard the story about the piano from Dolly, and that piano was inherited by my mom, and that's the piano that I took piano lessons on. And so that piano brings a piece of history to you in the form of a guitar and us singing a song together. So please join my mom as she leads us.
Okay, I'm in a supporting role here. Okay, so we're all singing in unison. The Home on the Range was the chosen song. It's the state song. And the writer of the lyrics used the Homestead Act to settle in Smith County, Smith Center, I'm not sure. It's at the back tells the history. But it sounded like, it was connected to our family's experience as well. We're just singing verse 1, 2, and 4 along with the chorus. It was pointed out to me by Jeff that verse 3 is a little soft on genocide, the genocide of our indigenous people. So we're not going to sing that one anyway, so we can shorten it. So.
But it's on the state's website though.
But it is on the stage, actually it's worse on the state's website, and there's about 5 other verses as well. But we're just singing these, so please sing loudly so I don't feel all by myself. Okay. Oh, give me
figured out now. Will is Cindy's son, William Madero's Priester. Next up is Grant Priester, the second son to Tony and Steve. He is an attorney that lives in Washington, D.C. So he's got a few talks himself. He is going to talk about the Homestead Act and the Timber Plan Act.
Thanks, Mark. Well, I just wanted to say I think I drew the short straw being born after Will and having to follow that. But I am an attorney, as Mark said, one of the few family attorneys here, and so I get to address the most exciting issue here, the legal history of the farm. So we're going to talk about statutes, so get excited. But it's going to be so. So as Mark said, Edwin C. homesteaded this land here in 1872, and so the Homestead Act is really central to what has happened on this land over the last 150 years. But when we say Homestead Act, we're not just talking about one specific act that Congress passed. It's a whole slew of laws that Congress passed to make it possible for homesteads like these. And so I really just want to talk about three of them and really two of them that impact this land. The first was the Homestead Act of 1862, and that is the act that Edwin C. Mercer homesteaded this land under. The certificate that is accompanied, that is tied to this land is a Homestead Act certificate signed by President Rutherford B. Hayes. And so that act directly resulted in homesteading of this land, and what that act provided was that settlers who came out and settled land would get 160 acres of land if they settled and cultivated that land. And the whole Homestead Act, all the statutes, the laws that were passed under that principle came out of the free soil idea of the Northerners, that farmers should really be responsible for farming their own land, as opposed to the Southerners who had land and were cultivating that land through slave labor. So it was really a political movement, the free soil movement, the homestead movement, that was all tied to all the different issues that were going on at the time in the mid-19th century in this country. So that was directly related to Edwin C. homesteading this property. And then you had the next Homestead Act, which was the Southern Homestead Act of 1866, which really related to homesteading in the South, and resulted in a lot of African American homesteaders being able to acquire property in the South, and it was tied to the whole Reconstruction era after the Civil War in the South. So you had the Homestead Act of 1862 directly tied to this property, the Southern Homestead Act of 1866, which wasn't tied as directly to this area because we're not in the South. But then you had the next Homestead Act, which was the Timber Claims Act of 1873. And again, as Mark said, this land was homesteaded in 1872, so a year before that act was passed. But there are some indications that the property here was a timber claim property, and that at some point there was an effort made to make a claim under that act. And the Timber Claim Act, what it said was, if you have an initial Homestead Act property of 160 acres, you can get another 160 acres by planting trees on your land. And again, there's some indication that effort was made here. And the reason why Congress passed that act was that at the time, scientists believed that planting trees would help bring more rain to this area of the plains, in this kind of semi-arid climate here, which is kind of interesting. That was the common belief between scientists and farmers at the time. So they passed this act saying, well, let's get homesteaders to plant more trees. So there's some indication that occurred here. I think it was Aunt Viola that Mark said remembered some of our ancestors saying that trees had to be planted here, that Edwin C. had to plant trees here at some point and had that belief. But the requirements of that act were really strict. You had to plant trees on 40 of the 160 acres, and each acre had to have like 2,700 trees planted, and 600 and some of those trees had to survive 13 years before you would get title to the land. So it's just backbreaking work. The semi-arid climate here made it nearly impossible for farmers to get through those 13 years and have that many trees remaining. But about 20% of homesteaders from North Dakota down here to Kansas, which was really the prime area of the activity going on under this act, about 20% made claims under the Timber Act, and very few of them were able to meet the requirements and get title under that act. So it's not entirely clear how things proceeded on this land under the Timber Claims Act. This homestead ended up being 160 acres, so it's not clear that a claim was ever even made under that act officially, but we know that act affected what happened here, and whatever did happen, the result is that we have some of these beautiful trees on this land here in this beautiful landscape, which I know I've always enjoyed coming here and just seeing the beauty of the trees and the rest of the land here. So just wanted to share that. I found the history of what was going on at the time in this country interesting, and how it connects to our family's history.
Thanks, Grant. And last up, besides a little bit more than I've got to say, is Nicholas Treaster, third son of Tony and Steve. Nick's a little different than the rest of the children. He took to the agricultural aspects of the land. So Nick's going to talk about the evolution, that was the word I was looking for earlier, the evolution of farming from homesteading to now. And let's just hope he doesn't say every bit of it.
Yeah, we've had to cut a lot of this out, so. My mom's gonna help me show some.
Tell them where you're from.
Oh yeah, I'm from Dallas, Texas. So I've lived there and with my girlfriend Sammy, and currently I'm a field service manager for New Holland Corp. So I am the great grandson of Edwin C. Mercer, and I will share a quick overview of farming this land and how it has changed over the last 150 years. Except for the first horses and oxen, I think I have played on every single piece of farm equipment that has been used by every generation on this land. E.C. Mercer was likely a farmer long before the breakout of the Civil War. The first years on the farm, the family survived by foraging weeds such as sour clover, dandelions, and wild onions. The prairie grasses were so dense that many settlers, including E.C. Mercer's family, cut and tilled the matted prairie grasses into neat bricks, which were used to build sod homes. The first official crop on the farm was buffalo bones, as they gathered on the homestead and to be sold and ground down into bone meal. E.C. came to Kansas with a team of horses, which pulled the covered wagon and also worked to till the land, which would have been tremendously difficult. Those horses died in the first year, and E.C. replaced his horses with oxen. Oxen were like the tractor of the 1800s, cheap and strong. One ox died, but a baby calf was left behind by a cattle drive that happened to be moving from a herd from Abilene, Texas, through the homestead. And E.C. kept and trained that calf and teamed it with the older oxen, and he drove that as a team with the plow. In 1870, swarms of grasshoppers invaded this area and caused massive devastation. E.C. sent his family back to Illinois, but stayed to farm. He did not want to be laughed at or seen as a failure. His family later returned, and E.C. Mercer likely farmed up until the early 1900s. Around this time, Martin Mercer began farming the homestead, and this time coincides with World War I, and people in Europe badly needed our American wheat. One of the great innovations of this time was the mechanical reaper and binder. Wheat harvesting was still a major event that required the effort of the whole community. Crews would come bringing their steam engine and threshing machines to separate the straw and grains. In 1919, Mercer was killed by electrocution, and his son Slim took over the farm and farmed through the Dust Bowl decades. When the loose topsoils from the plains were blowing with the winds, Slim made many improvements. He bought a proper tractor, an International Harvester, in 1939. A handsome man needs a handsome tractor. And Slim also used new technology and bought a combine harvester that streamlined the functions of cutting, threshing, separation, and cleaning into one machine. Slim's model is unknown, but it was a self-propelled and it was yellow in color. It was later traded to a dealer, but the dealer never came and picked it up. As a kid, I played on my great-grandfather's combine, and the woods basically enveloped it. So, in 1966, Darrell Treaster took over farming duties, and Darrell was married to Slim's daughter, Carol Mercer. Darrell bought two J.I. Case LA model tractors to the homestead. The brute strength of the LA Case tractors was used to pull disc plows, one-way plows, chisel plows, spring-tooth harrows, and more. Darrell used his 101 McCormick International Combine on the homestead. It featured a 12-foot head and no cab. Darrell cut wheat for local neighbors, which was the start of his custom harvesting operation. In 1971, he bought two Massey Ferguson combines to follow the wheat harvest from Texas to Canada. And his employees included his children, Steve, Mark, Cindy, and Tom. The operation lasted until about 1978. Darrell once told me he needed a toolbox for the road, and Slim helped him fashion one out of a refrigerator. They hollowed out the inside and filled it with tools and put it in the back of their pickup. And that just shows you how resourceful my ancestors were. Darrell later purchased a Case 930 tractor and continued farming the homestead until 2006. Often he would take a metal folding chair, as Matthew alluded to, and wedge it between the tractor seat and the fender, often taking his grandsons for a ride, including myself. Now for many years, John Meisenheimer has farmed the homestead, and John uses John Deere equipment and modern precision farming techniques. John also uses a practice called no-till, which preserves the soil for conservation and production. These are direct lessons learned from the Dust Bowl era of Slim Mercer's farming here on the homestead. Today, due to the guidance of my grandfather and passion of my ancestors, I'm a part of the agriculture business, and for the last 4 years I've been working for Case New Holland Corporation, which manufactures farm equipment. Every day I support dealers who sell the equipment, and I love working with the farmers and hearing their stories. And often I find myself telling them about some of the stories from this homestead. So.
Very, very good, Nick. Thank you. Some of you have arrived since I gave the first part of the speech, but I left off in 1937 when my grandparents, Slim, Dolly, my mother Carol, who was 6 years old, and Slim's mother Sadie moves into the new farmhouse that you see over there. Carol attends Riverton School, which is somewhere right over in there, for her first 8 years, and then goes to Pretty Prairie and graduates from there. In 1949, she goes to Sterling College, meets a fellow by the name of Darrell Treaster from Beloit. They get married the next year in Pretty Prairie and moved to Beloit to be near his parents. They bought some farmland there. 2 sons were born there, Stephen, Darrell Treaster, my brother, Mark Robert Treaster, that'd be me. And Dad decided that he wanted to be a farmer, but he could probably make more money doing something else. So we moved to Kansas City. He hauled cars for Ford cars around the country. Cindy was born there in 1957. Cynthia Gail Treaster. In 1965, we moved to Hutchinson. And Dad does, as was just told, took over the farming at that point on the land here in Reno County. In 1963, Dolly convinces my grandfather that he doesn't want to live here anymore. And they buy a house in Pretty Prairie and they move there. The house is rented out for most of the next 2 decades to other families. Got to keep going here. So, got to remember what comes next. I'm sorry.
Start over, Mark. We just got here.
Yeah. You know, you should have been here earlier. Okay, so in 1971, my mother dies, and in 1972, my father remarried Shirley Wagner Treaster and brings us a brother, Tom. Would you raise your hand, Tom? There's Tom. Tom's decided not to talk today, and that's okay. We're glad he's here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being my brother. In 1978, Cindy mentioned Slim dies, and because of the antiquity, a bad law at that time, inheritance law, the land goes into a trust, which my grandmother gets all the benefits from. Technically, not technically, but really, she owns the land still, owns the house still. I make an executive decision as the trustee of that trust to rent the house to myself. So, interesting tidbit. Mary and I, in 1983, moved into the farmhouse, and as Andrew said, he was born the next day. In 1996, Dolly dies, and Steve, Mark, and Cindy, the siblings, begin to own an undivided 1/3 of the farm. Steve, being an attorney, draws up the papers for the Mercer Maple Farms LLC, that is still the legal entity for this farm, with the 3 siblings sharing the profits. In 1998, Mark and Mary buy the house from Steve and Cindy that I mentioned earlier. Sorry if you weren't here before. And 7 acres. And that allows us then to do what we want to with the home, as far as additions and renovations and all that. Some had already taken place, and I was going to go through those, but we're out of time, so I won't do that. In 2002, unfortunately, Steve dies, and his wife, Tony, takes over as a partner. So, and that's how it is today. Cindy, Tony, and I are the partners. Nick mentioned 2006, Daryl quits farming, and John Eisenheimer takes over the farming. And that brings us up to date. Now, been many renovations I won't go through, but the 2 big additions that we're very proud of, well, one of them's here, right here. This garage wasn't here, and all the concrete. Like I said, if you were here earlier, there was an old garage that my great-great-grandfather did his blacksmithing in, but the attic, the roof line was changed when we, well, we didn't do the work, but we had it done, turned the attic into a master bathroom and master bedroom. And very proud of that addition. And then last year, my friend Matt Dirksen, is he around? Raise your hand, Matt. Matt went to high school with me at Beulah. I won't go through his whole history, but he lives in Virginia now. He came back and he slave drove for 8 weeks, and he and I built this screened-in porch that we have, and it's wonderful. I was able to, as the report here says, take his directions for nailing very well. The only thing I was good at was really painting. So that brings us to the end. We have entertainment later tonight. We have a meal coming up. We're going to take some family photos. If you